Beneath the surface of history lies a tale too dangerous for textbooks, a mission erased, a bridge forgotten, and lives gambled on silence. Step carefully now. What you're about to hear was never meant to survive the war. The Ardennes forest had always whispered secrets through its trees, but in the brutal winter of 1944, it held a truth that would never make the headlines. Operation Fireglass was not recorded in the Grand Allied reports, nor did it earn medals or speeches. Yet those who crossed its fragile path, cold, mud-caked, and breathing smoke, knew it had shifted the momentum of the Battle of the Bulge. It began with an argument. Lieutenant Colonel Mason Kearney, an Irish-American combat engineer with the 294th Engineer Combat Battalion, slammed his gloved fist against a frozen table inside a makeshift command tent. "We can't wait for orders. If we don't find a way across that river, Bastogne will fall, and with it the whole goddamn flank." Major Yves Moreau of the Free Belgian Forces nodded in agreement, her breath fogging in the icy air. Her partisans had been tracking German movement across the River for days. There's an old Roman bridge, collapsed in 1932. Local farmers say there's still stonework underwater. We can build on it. The Aurthe was more obstacle than river in that cold, partially frozen, jagged with debris from bombed-out viaducts. German panzer divisions, confident that the terrain was impassable, had left only a token force nearby. It was a blind spot in Hitler's offensive, one that Fireglass intended to exploit. On December 21st, under the cover of a fog-choked dawn, a group of 34 Allied personnel, engineers, Belgian resistance, and a detachment of 101st Airborne, moved through dense woodland toward the riverbed. Among them was a young corporal named Thomas Ridley, a former carpenter from Ohio. He would later write in a letter, "We built a bridge from ghosts and frost. Every board carried the weight of a city. The build was brutal. Chainsaws choked in the cold. Nails snapped from the steel. Every hammer strike felt like betrayal to the silence." But Moreau's partisans kept watch, ambushing any German patrol that wandered too close. The engineers worked without light, measuring by feel and whispered math. They used fragments of barns, cartwheels, even headboards from abandoned homes. After 38 hours, the bridge stood, rough, narrow, and trembling, but strong enough for trucks, tanks, and the hope of victory. At 0300 on December 23rd, Major Glenn Harrow's armored column rolled over the Fireglass Bridge. No headlights, no radios, just the low rumble of steel over planks. Local children had smeared soot on whitewashed farmhouses to hide any reflected light. In the surrounding woods, Belgian teenagers armed with old hunting rifles and Molotovs stood ready to delay any sudden German advance. What followed was a hammer strike into the exposed side of the German offensive. Harrow's column didn't stop at Bastogne. They rolled through 4 occupied villages and broke a crucial German supply line. Ammunition dumps exploded. Fuel convoys burned. In a single dawn, the southern claw of the Wehrmacht's thrust was snapped off at the joint. German intelligence was baffled. Their maps showed no bridges in that sector. Luftwaffe scouts were grounded by weather. One intercepted German report called it a phantom road conjured by Allied witches. But the cost was steep. On Christmas Eve, the Germans counterattacked. Mortar shells rained down on the crossing. The bridge held, just long enough to evacuate wounded and reroute remaining forces. Then, under heavy fire, Kearney detonated charges at its base. The Fireglass Bridge collapsed into the river, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. In the chaos, Lieutenant Colonel Kearney was struck by shrapnel and presumed dead. Moreau disappeared into the hills with the retreating partisans. Corporal Ridley was found wandering near a burned-out farmhouse, ears bleeding from concussive blasts, his coat lined with maps showing alternate crossing points he never had a chance to build. The official U.S. Army history made no mention of Operation Fireglass. Bastogne was declared held thanks to combined efforts of infantry and air support. No record survived beyond field notes and the scattered testimonies of survivors. For decades, Fireglass was little more than a whispered legend among veterans. Then in 1996, A Belgian historian named Lucien de Klerk uncovered a box of personal effects from a farmhouse attic near Houffalize. Inside were frostbitten gloves, a blood-stained map, and an undeveloped roll of film. When processed, the grainy photos revealed a crude but unmistakable bridge, and tanks moving single file across a wooden path bordered by snowdrifts and pine. The most startling find was a page torn from an engineer's notebook. In the margins, scrawled in shaking pencil, were the words, "We crossed the river on borrowed time. Built by frost. Blessed by silence." In 2010, a small plaque was erected on the western bank of the Aurada, hidden from major roads and only reachable by footpath. It reads, "To those who built what could not be seen, and crossed where none believed possible. Operation Fireglass, December 1944. Every winter, a few veterans and local families gather in silence. No parades. No speeches. Just a moment to honor a forgotten bridge, born from desperation and held together by the will to change the tide of war." They called it the Gray Ghost, not because of its color, though its specially coated hull did shimmer like sea smoke, but because it was there and gone without a trace, leaving wreckage in its wake and confusion in enemy reports. Submarine X-117, a British experimental long-range attack sub, operated in the blackest shadows of the Atlantic War. Officially, it didn't exist. Commissioned in mid-1942 under the top-secret Project Wraith, X-117 was built in a hidden drydock on the Scottish island of Hoy. Its frame was reinforced with a hybrid steel alloy prototype, and it boasted revolutionary quiet-drive propellers and an early version of sonar masking. Only 12 men knew of its construction. Only one was allowed to captain her. Commander Elias Grant was a Canadian naval officer with a record that read more like a spy novel than a resume. Born in Nova Scotia, fluent in German, and recruited by the Royal Navy's Intelligence Division in 1939, Grant had a reputation for unconventional tactics. Some said he'd spent time with the OSS. Others swore he'd been part of a Soviet liaison program in Finland. What was certain was that in October 1942, he took command of X-117 and disappeared into the Atlantic with a crew of 27 hand-picked men. Over the next 6 months, U-boat command in Berlin began to panic. A series of high-value German convoys disappeared in a strange, deliberate pattern. Not simple sinkings, these were surgical strikes. Fuel tankers obliterated while escort destroyers remained untouched. Supply ships gutted at night, no sonar warnings, no torpedoes detected. In all cases, no survivors. No one ever saw the attacker. By January 1943, the Kriegsmarine had classified the phenomenon as Anomaly Wellengeist, the phantom of the waves. What the Germans didn't know was that X-117 wasn't merely attacking. It was hunting. Allied intelligence had caught wind of a courier system the Germans were using to transport parts of an upgraded Enigma machine, code-named Mark IV. These components were split between multiple vessels to avoid interception. If X-117 could gather enough pieces, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park believed they could reconstruct the new cipher and turn the tide of the Atlantic War. X-117's greatest achievement came on the night of March 8, 1943. Acting on a decrypted Luftwaffe signal, Grant maneuvered into the midst of a heavily guarded convoy just west of the Azores. The target, U-601, believed to be carrying the Enigma's rotor prototypes. Using a cloaked running technique called dead drift, X-117 coasted silently past the German escort screen and fired a magnetic torpedo from just 300 meters away, suicide range for most subs. The torpedo struck clean. U-601 exploded in a burst of fire and metal. Grant surfaced in the chaos and ordered a boarding party onto the flaming wreckage, something unheard of in submarine warfare. Amid the smoke and bodies, they recovered a metal lockbox marked with the eagle insignia of the Reichssicherheitsamt, Nazi Germany's security command. The box contained 2 Enigma rotors, one of them cracked in half, the other pristine. X-117 vanished again, slipping under the surface as German depth charges lit up the water around them. It was their most dangerous maneuver yet, and their last known mission. By April 1943, reports from the Admiralty showed a troubling silence. No transmissions. No safe harbor sightings. No wreckage. Just a final encoded message, received on April 4th from an untraceable position near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Mission complete. Ghost will rest where light cannot reach. Theories exploded in the years after the war. Some claimed the sub was lost in a freak undersea quake. Others suggested sabotage, maybe even a Soviet defection. One declassified OSS file suggested the sub had docked briefly in neutral Spain before vanishing. But none of the crew were ever seen again. The rotor pieces made it to Bletchley, but no one knew how. One file, heavily redacted, implies the box was delivered anonymously in a sealed crate addressed to Room 47, Hut 6. In the 1980s, oceanographer Dr. Raymond Kirsch led a private expedition using deep-sea sonar around the area of X-117's last transmission. They found no wreck, but they did discover an uncharted trench, deeper than expected, with metallic anomalies buried beneath layers of volcanic silt. One resembled a submarine's conning tower. When the British Ministry of Defence learned of the discovery, the site was immediately closed off and declared a protected ecological research zone. More pieces surfaced in the years that followed. A German sailor's diary, recovered from a sunken lifeboat in 1946, mentioned a gray demon fish with no flag attacking his convoy. A coded letter from a former Bletchley Park technician described an artifact locked away in a box labeled Wraith 1B. In 2004, a Canadian Naval Museum received an anonymous donation, a tattered Royal Navy cap with the stitched initials EG and a tag that read, "We're still watching." Though never acknowledged by the Royal Navy, X-117 remains a legend within the maritime community. Veterans whisper about it during reunions. Young naval officers toast to it on stormy nights. The ghost, they say, is not gone. It's simply waiting, somewhere in the dark waters, beneath time, beneath truth. On the 75th anniversary of its disappearance, a small brass plaque was affixed inside a museum on Hoy. It reads, "For the ship that sailed without a flag, and the men who vanished without a trace. X-117, the war's silent shadow." A ghost story, yes, but perhaps the most real of them all. The first time they played, the city above them was burning. The date was September 28, 1939. Warsaw had been under siege for nearly a month. German artillery had turned boulevards into corridors of ash, and families huddled in cellars, counting seconds between explosions. In the crypt of St. Casimir's Church in the Old Town, a violinist named Adela Rosenfeld drew her bow across an open string, shaking the silence with something that wasn't terror. There were 5 of them at first, Rosenfeld on violin, her cousin Jakub on cello, a retired music teacher named Wiktor Abramczyk on piano, and 2 flutists from the Polish radio orchestra who had been separated from their unit during the chaos. They had no sheet music, no rehearsal, and no idea if anyone was listening. But they played anyway. The piece was a slow movement from Chopin's Piano Trio in G minor. Outside, German dive bombers screamed through the sky. That performance marked the birth of Orchestra, the Orchestra of Shadows. Within months, the group grew. Word spread through the underground Polish resistance and the remnants of the Jewish community. Musicians found each other in soup lines, in hiding places, and through whispered introductions. The orchestra rehearsed in basements, crypts, and disused sewer tunnels beneath the ruins of Warsaw. Sometimes they played for the comfort of civilians. Sometimes for the memory of the vanished. But often, they played to pass messages. The idea came from Wiktor. He had once been a signals operator in the First World War. He realized that musical phrasing could be subtly altered to correspond with prearranged codes, slightly longer rests for dots, elongated notes for dashes. Morse code embedded in melody. It was genius. In early 1941, the orchestra played a public concert, under German supervision, in one of the surviving theaters near Marszałkowska Street. It featured works by German composers, per Nazi regulations, but hidden within a Bach fugue was the message, "Operation drops begin Thursday. Bridge at midnight." The intended recipient, a courier for the Home Army, decoded it just in time. Over the next 2 years, Orchestra became the resistance's most elegant weapon. Their concerts served as covert communication hubs, their programs as cipher keys, and their instruments as carriers of information. They passed word of arms deliveries, German patrol routes, and even SS officer movements. German authorities remained unaware. The musicians were considered useful cultural pawns, proof that the Reich was restoring order to Poland. They were given performance permits, sometimes even escorted by Wehrmacht officers unaware they were guarding coded sabotage plans. But the orchestra's greatest act of defiance came in the spring of 1943, during the height of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Adela, now the de facto leader, arranged a performance of Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, to be broadcast via radio. What no one knew, save the resistance and 2 engineers in the Polish underground, was that the performance would also be transmitted through a secret frequency installed in the church's crypt. It was the first time since the occupation that Free Polish forces in London received live intelligence directly from Warsaw. The Nocturne carried a message: general chaos in District 4. Resistance strong. Barricades holding. German reinforcements inbound from South Rail. The British confirmed later that the coded performance led to an airdrop of weapons and medical supplies over the outskirts of Warsaw just 2 days later. Though the uprising was eventually crushed, those brief victories, those flashes of freedom, were carried on the notes of a piano and strings played in the dark. In the summer of 1944, as the Warsaw Uprising began in earnest, the orchestra continued its clandestine concerts even as buildings collapsed and SS troops cleared entire neighborhoods. Jakub Rosenfeld was shot while smuggling a cello double-lined with ammunition blueprints. The group splintered, some were killed, some captured, others vanished into the rubble. Adela refused to leave. In her final performance, just days before the complete destruction of the old town, she played alone in the cellar of St. Casimir's. A tape recorder, smuggled in from a captured German communications truck, recorded her last piece. It was an original composition, WWII Miasta, a prayer for the city. Then the bombs fell again. The church collapsed. For decades, no one knew what became of her. In 1967, during a renovation of the rebuilt St. Casimir's Church, workers discovered a sealed chamber beneath the new crypt. Inside were fragments of instruments, rusted music stands, and a suitcase containing reel-to-reel tapes marked with a red wax seal. It took years to restore them, but when the audio was finally played in 1974 on Polish radio, the sound of Adela's final solo echoed across the country. The broadcast ignited a wave of interest. Survivors came forward with memories. A former SS soldier, racked with guilt, admitted that he once escorted the orchestra through a checkpoint and remembered how the violinist's eyes never left his. "She stared right through me," he said, "as if she knew she'd outlive all of us." One elderly resistance fighter recalled using programs from concerts to decode rail schedules. Another said the orchestra had saved hundreds, if not more, by providing critical timing for evacuations and diversions. Today, a stone relief in the crypt of St. Casimir's depicts a woman playing a violin beneath broken arches. Below it reads, "Music became our code, our prayer, our resistance." Every year on September 28th, at dusk, Warsaw's Philharmonic Orchestra performs WWII Miasta by candlelight. No amplification, no fanfare, just strings and shadows, echoing in the place where silence once defied an empire. In the spring of 1941, London stood in a paradox, blazing from nightly Luftwaffe raids, yet still humming with life beneath its soot-stained skyline. While the city's surface reeled under firebombs and ration lines, a deeper battle played out in the cryptic shadows beneath Downing Street. This was the realm of Operation Basilisk, a clandestine MI6 unit tasked not with spying abroad, but with purging treason from within. The operation was born out of paranoia, but not unfounded. British intelligence had intercepted encrypted German transmissions suggesting that a high-ranking Nazi operative had infiltrated Whitehall. The messages made repeated reference to a codename, Der Sperber, the Sparrowhawk. But the most chilling line, translated from the original German, read, "Asterisk, the hawk is close to the lion. The strike will be surgical. No retreat. Asterisk." Winston Churchill, known for his bravado and penchant for the dramatic, ordered Basilisk formed immediately. Its leader was an unlikely choice, Eliza Thornton, a former stage actress turned SOE operative whose reputation in Paris included disguising herself as a French countess, stealing Nazi dispatches, and vanishing before anyone could remember her face. She had no official military rank, but she had Churchill's personal trust. Operating from a warren of tunnels beneath the war rooms, Thornton assembled a team of 6 agents, codebreakers, former criminals, demolition experts, and a linguist who once taught Hitler's nephew at Oxford. Their mission: identify the Sparrowhawk before he reached Churchill. The trail began with a whisper. A lieutenant in the Home Guard had shot himself in an abandoned telegraph office, leaving behind only a blood-stained note reading, "Asterisk, he's in the room with him. God help us." Asterisk days later, a supply officer assigned to Churchill's motorcade died in what was reported as an accident. A crate of radio equipment fell on his head. Thornton found the wiring had been deliberately weakened, and beneath the blood-spattered floor was a thin strip of metal, marked with the insignia of the Waffen-SS. The breakthrough came when Basilisk decrypted a German cipher hidden within the Ministry of Fuel's coal distribution reports. Embedded in the placement of decimal points was a code spelling out "Ascent." Eliza recognized it instantly, an old SOE reference to a breach plan involving the Churchill War Room's elevator shaft. There was only one problem: Churchill's elevator had recently undergone repairs. The man overseeing those repairs was an Anglo-German engineer named Franz Adler, who had worked on the London Underground during the 1930s and been quietly reinstated by civil authorities despite MI5 objections. On paper, he was unremarkable. But Thornton had seen his file. During the Munich Agreement, Adler had attended multiple high-level German-British business delegations. A face in the crowd, forgotten by most. Eliza arranged a test. She left false documents in Churchill's briefing desk, indicating that he would be traveling to inspect anti-aircraft installations in Kent on May 14th. The next day, MI6 intercepted a German transmission. Asterisk, lion leaves the den at dawn. Prepare the sky. Asterisk. Churchill never left. But Basilisk followed Adler that evening as he descended into the war rooms with a toolkit and forged credentials. The final confrontation played out beneath Britain's nerve center. The war rooms were quiet, the concrete-lined corridors echoing only with distant footsteps and typewriters. Thornton, dressed as a ministry stenographer, waited in a side corridor as Adler approached the elevator shaft. She watched him open a maintenance panel, revealing not repair tools but a compact V2 warhead trigger, a prototype small enough to be detonated via signal. As she stepped forward, pistol drawn, Adler turned calmly. "I expected the lion," he said in perfect English. "Instead, I get the actress." Their fight was brutal. Adler was no soldier, but he was precise. He slashed with a sharpened screwdriver, nearly severing Eliza's arm. She knocked him back with a punch that dislodged one of his teeth. In the end, she jammed her pistol barrel into his stomach and pulled the trigger just as he lunged at her with a blade hidden in his boot. Adler died instantly. Eliza collapsed next to him, blood pooling beneath her coat. Churchill arrived minutes later, escorted by Basilisk agents who had monitored the scuffle through hidden pipes repurposed from the building's original heating system. He stood silently as medics stabilized Eliza. "Was it him?" he asked. Thornton, weak from blood loss, nodded. "He got into the war rooms," she whispered. The hawk was already in the nest. The Prime Minister ordered all details of the event buried. The war rooms were swept, repainted, and Adler's body cremated under a false name. His remains were dumped into the Thames under cover of darkness. The V2 trigger was dismantled and passed to American intelligence for reverse engineering. No public acknowledgement of Operation Basilisk would ever be made. Eliza Thornton was discharged from service with no ceremony. She returned to theater work under an alias, never speaking of what happened beneath Downing Street. Only in 1981 did a private journal emerge from her estate, donated to the Imperial War Museum. In it, she described the moment Churchill looked down at her and said, "Asterisk, you're the first woman to ever fight for the heart of Britain itself." Asterisk. Today, in a corner of the Churchill War Rooms, just behind a locked panel in the elevator shaft, There's a small engraving scratched into the steel. E.T. May 14, 1941, the lion lived. No tourists notice it. Few even know it exists. But those who do say it marks the spot where one woman fought, bled, and nearly died to keep the war from ending in the belly of London, in a duel no history book ever dared to record. The American invasion of Okinawa in April 1945 was a thunderstorm of fire and steel. Ships pounded the coast with endless shells, aircraft strafed ridgelines, and Marines clawed inch by inch through trenches, caves, and machine gun nests. But beneath the fury of the Pacific's final battle was another war entirely. A silent rebellion waged not with bullets, but with memory, misdirection, and mercy. They called themselves Hana no Kage, Shadows of the Blossom. Their symbol was a carved cherry tree petal, left near cave entrances and village walls. To the Imperial Japanese Army, they were ghosts. To the Okinawan civilians trapped between kamikaze honor and American flamethrowers, they were saviors. It began in the village of Shiratama, nestled between limestone cliffs and sugarcane fields, long before the American fleet darkened the sea. The Japanese government had absorbed Okinawa into its empire, but always saw its people as different, neither fully Japanese nor entirely foreign. Many Okinawans spoke a distinct dialect, followed older customs, and were distrusted by Tokyo. When the Japanese army fortified the island, they conscripted Okinawan boys as ammunition porters and human shields. They told villagers that Americans were demons who would torture and kill indiscriminately. Families were given grenades with whispered instructions. Asterisk, if capture is certain, die as the emperor wishes. Asterisk. But not all accepted that fate. Aya Uehara, a 52-year-old midwife, was the first known member of the rebellion. When a teenage girl wounded by shrapnel was brought to her hut, Aya treated her in secret, despite knowing the girl had fled her assigned kamikaze medical unit. In the dead of night, she and an old fisherman named Kenji carried the girl to a cave they had stocked with dried fish, roots, and rainwater. It was the first grave of blossoms, a place not of death, but of secret life. Others followed. The Hana no Kage grew, not as an organization with commanders or uniforms, but as a quiet code of resistance. Old women whispered routes through safe ravines to wounded soldiers too broken to keep fighting. Children dropped pebbles in specific patterns outside cave entrances to signal which were occupied by civilians, not soldiers. Messages were stitched into kimonos, telling Americans where not to bomb. Some members took greater risks. A schoolteacher named Haruto Tamashiro kept a ledger of every civilian executed by Japanese forces for cowardice. His notebook, hidden inside the wall of an abandoned schoolhouse, bore the names of 117 villagers and the officers responsible. When American Marines finally took the area, a local boy handed the notebook to a translator. It became a crucial document during the post-war tribunals. Despite the scale of the fighting, more than 180,000 troops and nearly 3 months of slaughter, the Hana no Kage operated without being caught for weeks. Their greatest act came during the siege of the Maeda Escarpment, known as Hacksaw Ridge. As American forces assaulted the cliffside, dozens of wounded Marines were left behind on the battlefield. Under cover of smoke and confusion, 4 Okinawan women, all past the age of 60, emerged with crude stretchers made from fishing nets and tatami mats. Speaking no English, they mimed peace and beckoned the wounded. They made 12 trips through enemy lines, never shot, never stopped. An American corpsman later swore he saw one woman walk calmly past a stunned Japanese machine gunner who simply lowered his weapon. One of those women, Eiko Matsuda, kept a diary throughout the battle, written on torn rice paper with a sharpened bamboo sliver. In it, she wrote, Asterisk, the soldiers do not see me. They see their mothers. They let me pass because I walk like memory. Asterisk. By the end of the battle in June 1945, Okinawa had lost over 100,000 civilians, many by suicide, others executed, and many more simply vanished in the crossfire. But Hana no Kage saved lives where they could. Conservative estimates suggest they helped over 400 civilians and 60 American and Japanese deserters find shelter or escape. After the war, the U.S. occupation government took little interest in these stories. The Japanese government, humiliated by the defeat and eager to erase evidence of its brutality, declared that Okinawan loyalty had been total. Hana no Kage was never officially acknowledged, but the cherry blossoms remembered. In the 1960s, Okinawan villagers began carving small petal symbols into limestone caves. Some were visible only at dawn, the light striking them just right. American soldiers stationed on the island started calling them ghost flowers. In 1985, during a construction project near the cliffs of Mabuni, workers discovered a sealed stone box buried beneath a camphor tree. Inside were scraps of cloth, hairpins, and the charred remains of Aya Uehara's midwife ledger. There were 58 names written in a steady hand, each belonging to someone she had helped guide to safety. A local historian, Dr. Koji Tanaka, began collecting oral histories. Though many survivors were reluctant to speak, some eventually shared stories of blossom graves where families had hidden together for weeks, nourished only by spring water and the quiet strength of women who risked everything to defy a war they never chose. Today, there is no official monument to Hana no Kage. But on the southern coast of Okinawa, in a small grove where sakura trees bloom unnaturally late in the season, visitors can find a stone carved with only one phrase: "We lived in the shadow of honor and chose life instead." Every year, during cherry blossom season, old villagers place offerings of fruit and paper cranes beneath the trees. They do not speak. They do not sing. But among the petals and sea breeze, you might hear something if you listen closely, a whisper carried on wind and memory, echoing from the island of the blossoming graves. They crossed a river no map ever marked, and vanished into frost and fire. No medals, no glory, just shadows beneath the snow. Some truths weren't buried, they were hidden, because the cost of remembering might be too high.